Great. So according to David, we're recording or live streaming. So perfect. So welcome back to the 5th meeting of the Medical Marijuana Working Group. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everybody. I know that we're all busy. We were just talking about that before we started the recording. We do have an action-packed agenda, some topics that we've previously discussed, some that are new ones. So I want to make sure that we have time to get through them. But first and foremost, a quick round of introductions for people that are watching or watch the recording to understand who's here. And I'll just say up front, it looks like we haven't been joined by John Black, Michelle Caminos, and Trish Callahan will be unable to join us today. But per usual, I will start and just quickly go around the room. So Catherine. Looks like you're on mute, Catherine.
I hate that stupid button. Catherine Lewis with Homegrown Healthcare. We have a store in Hallowell, Maine, and we've been involved since 2010.
Paul
T. McCarrier, One Mill, representing patients and small business caregivers.
Susan.
Susan Meehan. I am a caregiver. I own Maze Mamas Supplements and Consulting, and I am the chairperson of Maine Cannabis Coalition. I represent caregivers, particularly small businesses. Thank you.
Is Joel with us? Yes, it looks like he is.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Barely, you're very choppy.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
That sounds better.
Sorry, Joel Pepin, caregiver, Jar Cannabis Company.
Perfect, thanks. David.
Dave Vickers, Origins caregiver representative.
Josh.
Josh Quint with Canuvo, dispensary representative.
Heather.
Heather Sullivan with Cureleaf, also a dispensary representative.
Barry.
Barry Chaffin, Nova Analytic Labs, testing facility representative.
Alex.
Alex McMahon, Medco, product manufacturing representative.
Sean.
Sean McDonough, nurse, patient representative.
Jamie. Uh-oh, is Jamie not here? Oh, okay. Julie. I know Julie's here. I saw her. Okay, we can come back. Chris.
Chris Beaumont, City of Portland, Marijuana Compliance Coordinator, and I'm one of the municipal representatives.
I think it's me, right?
Rebecca, yeah, sorry, I muted myself.
Rebecca McMahon, staff attorney from Maine Municipal Association, and I am a municipal representative.
Perfect. So thank you, everybody. Again, thank you for giving us some of your valuable time, especially around the holidays. Merry Christmas, happy holidays. I hope everybody has an amazing time with friends and family. Yes, Susan.
Michelle reports that she will be late. She has nursing issues with her son.
All right, we will welcome her when she joins us. So as you probably all know by now, we have an action-packed agenda, a lot to get through. Want to make sure that we have time to at least touch on all topics that we get through. So much like I think we did a good job in the 3rd meeting, bringing to a close conversations. We're going to try to do that again, leaving the opportunity if people have additional comments, whether it be in person or written. We want to make sure that we capture those so we can reach out accordingly, but need to get through some of these topics in order to complete our work and fulfill our obligations with both an eye towards what a potential rule may look like moving forward, but also in our report back to the legislature on our findings and our conversations coming along here. So we'll jump right into it, or before recap of the 4th meeting, sorry, we did have a lot of good conversation. I just want to call the working group members' attention to the fact that we did have a lot of those follow-up conversations. People did reach out. Those videos are live online on the website, and also the written feedback that we did solicit. We did get some great feedback that is also online. And to be clear, all of that at the end of the day will be made available to the legislature, both during the process for the rules, but also any report back, because I know a lot of it gets into a lot of nitty gritty detail, which is tough in this forum with the 17-member committee to talk about some of that, but certainly should be made available to the decision makers at that level. But just want to make sure everybody knows that, and those materials and resources are there. So jumping into the first discussion item, the working group's feedback about the testing proposal. So thank you to the individuals that reached out, that we had those meetings. Again, those are on the website. Thank you to the individuals that put written comments to us. Those are online and available to people to read through. But I just want to set an expectation and be clear about this. Specific to testing and other topics that we've discussed that would require statutory change, these will be going into the report back to the legislature. And we want to make sure that we're able to capture all of the voices around this table, both written, both from these meetings, in that report back. So the idea today, since we've kind of talked about this over and over again, we've gotten that feedback, we asked for that feedback to be solicited, is really to capture those voices and to see if there's any level of consensus on high level proposals, not necessarily the nitty gritty or logistics of how to execute that. So basically, I think the first thing that I want to do, David.
Should I let you finish before I?
Nope, you're great.
Oh man, I feel like I'm playing Jeopardy right there. One thing just for the group, and I think it's important that just for transparency purposes, when I came into this, obviously I've had some strong feelings about testing, right? And I talked to Eric about this yesterday. I think it's always important to not just take your views, but make sure that you listen to everybody else's views, right? Because if you don't, what's the point? And one of the things there were two things that really struck me from the last meeting and conversations. And one of them was to have the ability for testing. And again, store owners can do what they want, right? Like I have the right as a store owner to say, I'm only going to have product on my shelf that's been fully tested. Okay, that's my right. But I do like the idea of giving the option, as long as there's transparency. And this has been the big thing for me, everybody, is that there isn't always transparency. Fair enough. So for me, when I look at this, I love the idea that from a storefront perspective, right, that kind of that commercial transaction, I think the term's been used, there's either real world test, and I mean real world, not that one test that you had that was spectacular, but real world test, batch specific, or a very clearly defined label that will be transparent and would show to the consumer, the patient, of course, whether that product had been tested or not. And I feel like, when you start talking about putting regulations in, and this industry has been involved for a while, I think it's a good spot to start at. And then, we can sort of see where that all evolves. But that was my thought. And that's what I shared with Eric yesterday. And where I think most of you remember, I've been pretty adamant about, the need for testing. But I also think there's a lot of reasons that, that might be a nice compromise, as long as it's transparent. So that was what I just wanted to put forth.
No, thank you, David. And I'll go to Paul, and then after that, I'll kind of continue with what direction I'm hoping this goes in. So Paul, fire away.
I'm glad you brought that up, David, especially in the idea of trying to come forward with some policy changes. I see that on the inverse, where it's that people, are allowed to label their products as being tested. I think we know, I know that you have a lot of great test results, and I know a lot of other people have great test results too. But I don't see, at this point, the need to try to mandate anything else upon this industry with everything else that's going on between electricity bills, between the continuing pandemic, between just being able to operate a business in competition with large multi-state operators. But I do fully support the idea that people should be able to label their products as tested and label those test results and have those test results available. But, you know, since you and I seem to have the most back and forth last meeting, I just want to make sure I see what you're saying, but I'm looking at it from the inverse where
I get it.
where, so, you know, people should be allowed to label that their products as tested, but it shouldn't be mandated by the state that products have that label or not. I can't think of any other agricultural product that has that type of mandate from the state. Thank you.
Susan.
I think I could be convinced that a reasonable compromise is transparency and
We lost you, Susan.
Yeah. So I will
get to
continue.
choose. Buy the one that's not labeled. Sorry, do I buy the product?
We didn't hear any.
I'll start over.
Okay, yeah, try to start over.
Okay. I believe that transparency and labeling is an important consumer tool in any industry, whether I go into the grocery store and I want to buy the cheapest product, or I choose to buy the organic certified product or the pesticide-free product or the non-GMO product. I get to choose. So I could be convinced that transparency and labeling is an important thing for all of our consumers, patients, and otherwise to have. I otherwise would have difficulty supporting this mandate, and I have other information that I can share with the office and with the group by email. But transparency and labeling I could support.
Great. So all good feedback, and that's kind of heading in the direction that I wanted to take this group. And again, completing the work that we need to complete and capturing everybody's voice at the table. So I think the best place to start, understanding it seems from the conversations that we had, we've kind of coalesced into three groups. First group being there should be some level of required testing around the most commercial of entities with a delayed rollout, a timed rollout to help mitigate costs. The second is there should be some required testing, as Dave brought out. And if there's not, I guess it's not required testing, voluntary testing for certain analytes. And then if the individual registrant chooses not to partake in that, there is that transparency piece with labeling that clearly is distinct that it has not been tested. And third, and Susan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because this gets back to one of our earlier meetings, there's a group that is either in the camp of no testing, and I'm not saying that's what Susan, you're saying, but would lean on the state's ability or OMP's ability to simply do audit testing. Does anybody disagree with kind of coalescing around those three groups?
I feel like there still is a group, and it may be a very lonely group, but it's still a group that doesn't see data that supports this sort of policy push from the Office of Marijuana Policy, or this sort of policy push.
To be clear, OMP has not driven this conversation around testing. This has happened organically from meeting to meeting. We never once put it on the agenda up front. It's been conversations from registrants. It's been a significant conversation from patients. So just to be perfectly clear, and we were also asked for proposals to outline, to pull together the information that we've gathered from these conversations and something concrete that this working group can react to. Obviously, it's no surprise that from an agency perspective, with public and patient health in mind, that we're supportive of something like this. But I wouldn't say that this is a policy agenda being pushed by OMP. And Paul, just to be clear, again, and as our intention to move this forward in a transparent way that captures everybody's voice. So even if there's a small minority in what a high level testing proposal will be, that will be in the report back to the legislature. We're not trying to leave anybody or any voice aside. That's really would undermine the whole reason we're all together to have these conversations. So I think if appropriate, just an up and down vote. So if you're off camera, could you come on camera? Is there anybody off camera, David? If we believe as a group, there should be some level of testing in the vision of making this a more patient-centric, eye towards patient within the program. I'm not saying which bucket or which case, but some level of testing. Does that make sense? Does anybody need any type of clarification? So raise your hand if you think there should be some level of
I was
test.
saying, when you
Okay.
say some level of testing, you mean mandated testing? Is that what? Some of us believe there
No,
should be
I would
mandated
even say the voluntary testing with the transparency piece would fall into that bucket as well.
But don't we already have access to that? Don't
Yeah, we already have that.
voluntary
That's the existing program, except for transparent labeling.
Right. Yeah. I think those two kind of go to, from where I sit, and again, as everyone knows, I've been definitely a testing advocate. But I think those two go hand in hand, right? Because the problem is so many patients don't know that the product's not tested. That's all. That's my only reason, Susan and Paul, is just that reason. And you're right, Paul, by the way, that we all have had the right to, report our testing results, and, they have to be real, right? We've all, to be doing that. And, but I think that just adds a little more validity to the program. And I just think it would be a good thing for our patients. That's the thought there.
Catherine and Barry.
Found it this time. I think that I'm also on the side of mandating testing. I'm not in support of. I am in support of, if you are not testing your product on your own, then there needs to be a label that says it's not tested. And this is something that I've said from the very beginning. But until the testing is where it needs to be, I don't see how it can be mandated across the board. I don't even see how they're doing it in adult use. Right now, we're still operating under 2 testing labs, and I'm just developing a relationship with Nova now, and I'm excited about that. But we need to look at where, if we're doing law changes, we're talking statute changes. That's not even really on the table at this point, and I think you're going to continue to get serious feedback or pushback on mandating. I'm looking at the sampling that you sent us, and under the flower, one of the mandated tests is cannabinoid profile. While that's very nice to have, that's not necessary. So why are we mandating it? The water content, not necessary. Why are we mandating it?
Well,
why is the reason why we're mandating what we're mandating, and where is the reasoning behind it?
We can certainly make that available. As far as I think you're going to hear different things from different people as far as why that should be mandatory. I'm glad you brought that up, and Barry's next. I'm going to go to Barry, Sean, and Julie, and then cut it off. Paul, we'll have to follow up afterwards to make sure that we can get to the next topic. But a thought being, many people have brought it up, the wide variance of test results. We do have some data to support the fact that the 3, soon to be 4 labs that are certified with the CDC go through the process of data validation, and you're going to get a much tighter results, I would imagine. I'll let Barry speak to this, than allowing at-home testing, other individuals within the program to test. But I'll hand it over to Barry because your hand's up anyway.
Sorry, on mute for playing Zoom bingo. I just hit the sorry, I'm on mute button again. So yeah, like I said, I want to be here as a resource, especially around testing and any questions that are involved with that. I hear a lot of things that are said on these calls, and I just kind of want to chime in and maybe bring some clarity to some of these points. I hear one thing I've heard on these meetings is food's not tested. That's not true. Your food is tested in some form or fashion. It may be the facility in which the food is manufactured or sorted. It may be individual testing. There is food testing that does occur. So to say that, well, my Cheerios is not tested, that's not true. It simply takes looking to when you see these spinach recalls across the country or onion recalls for salmonella. That they can pinpoint where that occurred at what facility because there is testing. Another thing I hear through these calls is there's been no illnesses from THC or from, marijuana products. Again, not necessarily true. You are never going to find these data that's produced in these hospitals from acute products problems. Yes, we haven't seen that. It's not the marijuana that's causing a problem. It's the contaminants in the marijuana that's causing the problems. These contaminants are not acute. Usually, they're usually chronic. So it's long-term exposure to pesticides, long-term exposure to fungus and yeasts and molds and things like that in your products that will cause problems. So it's going to be very difficult to find any hard, concrete data to say that there is an issue there. Taking the data from our lab, again, I shared this, I believe, in our second meeting. We have a 40% failure rate for pesticides, and that's just for people who are actually testing the pesticides, and a 30% failure rate for microbials. And again, these are just for people that are actually testing that. This is in the non-compliance sector of our testing. The wide variance, I said this in one of the earlier meetings. I think there needs to be transparency to the public about lab results. You guys need to see what labs are passing, who's passing it, what values are passing across the board. That needs to be made transparent to the public, and I think that will help a lot of this the concern of variance, because for several reasons. One, maybe your particular instance you had a wide variance between two labs, but if you look at the statistical data that can be published and made public, you can see that perhaps it's really not that bad. Maybe you had this one instance where you had a 10% variant between two labs, but if you look at a whole between the 3 or 4 labs, however there may be, maybe it's really only 5% variance that we're seeing from transparency, for letting everyone know. Also, you can see trends. You can see certain labs that maybe are, again, there was a study done out in California. I can happy to present to the group Oregon. So they make the lab data transparent, and someone noticed that this lab that is always giving high potency results is always passing for contaminants. The other labs are not. So they did a little digging and did a little audit, and guess what? There was some shady business going on in that lab. So again, transparency in the labs. We need to be under the microscope more than anybody else. Is that all the points I needed to
Gary,
clarify?
can you just spend 20 seconds? And again, we're going to go to Sean and then cut it off. Susan, I see you've raised your hand. We can circle up after. Can you spend 20, 30 seconds talking about lab capacity? Because that's one of the main things that gets brought to us.
Absolutely. I've seen that a lot as well. So that's not really an issue. I can tell you that our lab, I can't speak for the other labs in the state, but I can tell you that our lab on our own, we could handle the entirety of the AU program testing and more. Capacity is not an issue from labs. It's actually the opposite. There's not enough volume to test to sustain labs. You can ask the folks at Esoterra that those guys, great lab, and it's just there's not the capacity in the state to support for testing labs. And so the bottleneck is not the issue from a client perspective. It's the opposite. Like I say, our lab itself, we could handle every single test in the AU program and probably all of the medical.
All right, Sean.
Yeah, just speaking from the patient perspective, the terminology of this is an agricultural product. Technically, I guess it is. It is a plant, but so is the opium that people are growing. Not here. But if you know what I mean, it just, I don't understand why there would be any negativity towards offering some sort of testing or putting labels that you can go to the store, much like you just said, where yes, your food products are tested. There's plenty of stuff on TV where you can see the recalls and everything like that. You can go to the store and get your tested food. You can go someplace where a farmer's market where you know that if it's labeled organic, they went through a process to get organic. Or you can go down the street where somebody puts their cucumbers in their cooler and they sell it to you six cucumbers for $1, but you don't know what they grew it with. You have that option to be able to do it, but it should be the patients should have that option. But if they go into a caregiver, a state caregiver, or a store, it should be something that if it's labeled, then it should list what it's been tested for. If it's not been tested, it should either be labeled or the patient should be known that it's not labeled because they haven't tested. You shouldn't put something on somebody's medicine to say that congratulations, you just brought, a gram of this, and FYI, it hasn't been tested as a label. It should be known though. I just cannot fathom why anybody would want to put out product and be reluctant to have it tested for the patient. We're here to get it for our medicine, agricultural or medicinal or pharmaceutical or whatever you want to call it. It is medicine to the patients. And it's nice that we would know what it is in it or is not in it.
Okay, thank you, Sean. So we're going to put a bow on that conversation. I see Catherine and Susan. We'll follow up. It seems that this group is coalescing around the idea of this voluntary testing with proper labeling. And I want to call to a vote. And again, this is very high level. We will not get into the details. And then we'll offer up additional space for other voices that would like to go left or right here, but we can start there. So very high level, again, the details of any proposal, but more or less just the understanding that we can require, voluntary testing, which would still be in a controlled rollout for those that wanted to take part in that process to make sure that it doesn't impact their bottom line or increase prices for patients. But if they choose not to take part in that testing program, that their product simply has to be labeled so that the patients, to Sean's point, know exactly what is in and what may not be in their products. So I will cut it off at that. Do you support that? Please come off camera and raise your hands and keep them high enough, long enough so we can at least capture that. And then if you don't support that and you want to support something else, we will certainly take the time to capture that as well. So is everybody off camera? Catherine, Eric, Alex, Rebecca, Barry, Dave, Sean, Josh, John, Chris, Joel, and Julie. So it looked like Paul and Heather. So we'll start with Paul, making sure that we capture your voice. What would we'll call it a minority report. What would your proposal be?
I mean, my proposal would be for the state to look to set a standard of what they're looking to be tested for and to continue to collect data to see if there's a need for testing.
Okay. And Heather, what would yours be?
My proposal would be mandatory testing for products that are sold in retail storefronts.
And to be clear, I don't think I brought this up yesterday at any other meeting. So when I raise my hand, I'm actually doing it just to help encourage people to take a vote. It's not actually OMP voting. We want to more or less, okay, you guys get it. And then Susan, did you vote?
No, I am on incredible internet in Connecticut and still getting kicked off, but I am on my phone now. I would vote for transparent labeling and no mandatory testing.
And Barry, before we move on.
Yeah, Eric, I just want to be clear. We would prefer a mandatory. I think that's the better way to go, but we would also support a voluntary with labeling. I just want to be clear that we support both. We feel that some level of testing is better than no level of testing.
And Eric, just to add to mine, and I don't want to just harp on this point, but being from a rural area is we need to have geographic, the labs need to be geographically available to people in these different areas before we move forward with anything mandated by the state, whether the proposal for mandatory testing or the proposal for mandatory labeling. Just because, the biggest complaint that I hear is that there are no labs outside of Portland South.
Yeah, and I think, Barry, real quick.
Just want to address that point. We do pick up all over the state. We're in Portland, but we go all the way, past Bangor to get pickups where we go everywhere, any rural area. And I believe that all the other labs that are functioning now do the same. So just, again, as a resource to let you guys know that is already happening.
Thank you, Barry. All right. So moving on, just a little bit behind, but I think we're doing well considering all things, was a conversation about tracking, which you should have the proposal there. So I will preface this and start this off by saying this was one of the proposals, again, based in statute, but we understand was one of the ones that got the most pushback from industry last time. So our proposal, we've tried to limit it to a very small amount of registrants that would actually have to engage in the state's electronic record keeping or inventory tracking system. But really, it's more with an eye towards now, if we do have some type of testing requirements, the only real way to capture those would be to have some level of inventory tracking or electronic record keeping. So I think it would still fall in line with kind of the testing outcome, where the proposal would be the only registrants within the program that would have to utilize the state's electronic tracking portal would be those more commercial entities, whether you fall into the bucket of required testing for caregiver storefronts and dispensaries or that voluntary testing regime. You would still need to have that infrastructure in order to track the testing. So we're talking about 350 registrants out of the 3,100 that would utilize that system for the reason of being able to capture the testing aspect and the transparency there. So we'll go to Susan and then David for comment.
I'm a hard no on Metric. Metric is an international data harvesting, data selling conglomerate, and I will never agree to signing Maine Medical up to Metric in any way, shape, form, or size. Thank you.
You're well. I mean, okay. I don't want to speak on behalf of Metric, but they are an inventory tracking system utilized in a dozen other states. But understood, David.
I would echo Susan's hard no. I have, taken a little bit of slack as someone who's on both sides of the industry, right? As an AU operator and a medical operator. Getting into this program and us making decisions and recommendations to me is about the patients. And I don't see Metric as a help for our patients. As someone who does the Metric themselves at our operations, it is insanely cumbersome. The amount of time it takes is, I'm being honest with you guys. I've had days, and I love this more than anything I've ever done. Like, I am so passionate about this. I've thrown my hands up so many days and wanted to walk away. I cannot imagine caregivers or storefronts or anyone trying to really get into that. And my hope is at some point the AU side will think about that a little bit more. And I'm happy to talk more about it, but I just, it is a hard no for me, 100% hard no.
Sean.
Just so anybody can come off mute to help me answer this. Why would you want to track this? Even as a patient, I'm not worried about anybody knowing that I smoke marijuana, but I'm wondering why you want to know that I'm smoking that marijuana. Yeah. You don't care what kind of beer I drink. You don't care what kind of pop I drink. Why do you want to track what I just bought?
So just to be clear, it's not tracking patients or patients' activity. That's not what we're doing. It would be tracking the product as it moves through the system, and it really being the only tool the state would be able to utilize to capture the test results. The state or Metric would not be capturing patient information or patient purchasing habits or anything like that. Chris.
Yeah, raise the hand just to kind of answer Sean's question from my perspective. And Eric, you kind of touched on it there just briefly, but It's the actually verifying that that specific product was the product that was tested. The only way from my perspective to do that would be to line that up with a tracking system to some degree, to see whether that specific product or not a range of different products is one example, just from my perspective.
Okay, so product QXY on the counter that I just purchased, that QXY tracking stops before it reaches me. It's tracked up until the time that I make that purchase, or does somebody know that I just bought QXY? So if I am exposed to something, then they're going to be able to say, oh, on said and said date, Sean purchased QXY.
No, yeah, it wouldn't be able to track it back to you. It's seed to sale. So once it's sold, it's gone, it's out of the system. It would really, at that point, a lot of states utilize it for safety or recalls. It wouldn't be able to track it back to Sean. It would basically say this item has contaminant, potential negative health effects, and it would be on the patient or on the AU side, the consumer, to know that they have that product and to return it or do what they wanted to do with it. Heather, Susan, Dave, Joel.
So
John.
I guess my concern is if we don't track and trace, how do we know that the illicit market isn't taking market share from those of us that are acting responsibly in the system?
I mean, valid question, but I think at least from OMP's perspective, we would be utilizing the metric system simply with an eye towards testing. It logistically being the only way to have a foolproof testing regime. I'm sure we could spend time to think about how to actually get to. I mean, we're kind of eye towards testing.
Got it.
Yeah, that's why. I mean, if you're worried about inversion or diversion, it would really have to be utilized across 3100. And I think we all know that metric is not a foolproof system to do that. But yeah, it would just be those that would engage in the testing. So Susan.
Two things. First, labeling, again, I defer to being able to solve this, just like when a product is recalled in a grocery store chain, you see it all over the media. If you have products QXY at home, then you need to check your bottles and you need to return to the manufacturer or the caregiver or whatever. The diversion is law enforcement problem. And I believe that if someone wants to cheat the system, whether they're participating in metric or not, they are going to find a way to backdoor and cheat the system. I don't have any experience with metric, but I believe that people will find a way around that. And I want to point again that labeling could solve this problem. If a product has a batch number on it, it could be recalled. And if metric isn't going to trace to the consumer or the patient anyway, it gives you no benefit on the end point of sale. My other concern with it is, as a small caregiver who often wholesales to people with storefronts, there has been significant problems in other states where some people participate in the program and some don't. And how do we accommodate wholesaling to a storefront if the small caregiver is not in metric, for example, but still a hard no. Thank you.
I have David, Joel, John, and then Paul, and then I'm cutting it off and we'll figure out next steps.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as again, as the person who's operating, we operate a tier 3 AU cultivation facility. On the the adult use market, plus the medical side, right? And so when people hear these terms and they're keywords, right, like diversion and whatnot, sure, when you're sitting in a chair and you're not in this industry, those are words that will resonate with people. But when you do this day to day, and you really see that the operators that are trying to do this well, metric is really, to me, I understand, Eric, the testing side, but I gotta believe there's another way to do that. Like, I've got to believe that, like, genuinely. And I also think that, as someone who has done a lot of this, there would be so many people who would throw their hands up. And, that's the last thing we want, right? We want to put things in place and rules and regulations that bring people into our industry. We don't want to push people away. We want to bring them in. And I think in the last, even 5 years, we've seen a lot of people. I mean, I can't tell you how many people come to our store and they're caregivers and they're wonderful people. And they're like, Dave, we're here because we grow a really good product. And we want to get into this market. We want to get away from what we've been doing. And that to me is really exciting. And I do not think Metric would help that at all in any way, shape, or form. So I want to go on the record that, Heather, I super respect you and whatnot, but I think the exact opposite would happen. I think if you put Metric in play, you'd just be creating a stronger traditional market. And, I think we can find a better alternative. Testing, you know how I feel about that, but Metric, man, hard no.
Joel, John, Paul, and then again, we'll cut it off.
I personally have concerns about implementing Metric in the medical side, having experienced it with it on the AU side. It's extremely cumbersome. Like Dave, I've been quite nimble and I'm computer proficient, and we've been locked out of packages, and we communicate with Metric through an API through LeafLogix on the AU side, and there's a lot of glitches that occur, and it's hard. I will say, I would entertain some type of formalization to record keeping practices for commercial operators. In my opinion, medically, we've been operating my caregiver store, for instance, in January 2019. And medically, I don't know how you could run a store without some type of ERP, without some type of internalized database to keep track of your inventory, your pricing. If you want to communicate with Weed Maps, it's through your ERP. If you want to download your inventory on hand, it's through an ERP. If you want to do your audits in your store, if I want to be able to look at previous manifests from vendor orders to look at something, it's through our ERP. So I will say Metric, I think, would be extremely cumbersome to the medical side. On the medical side, my business operates in LeafLogix, and if Metric were existing in the medical market, it really wouldn't be anything different day to day for our staff, except when things glitch out. So I have the opinion of, I think there should be some type of formalized record keeping just from as a professional business person. If you're operating a store and you're buying products from third-party vendors and you want to keep track of batches and what's going out to patients, I think you need some type of system. I can pull up a manifest from vendor orders last year, any month, and for accounting purposes, I don't know how you'd be able to run a store without some type of centralized data system like that. But I don't think Metric is the solution.
Great feedback. John, and then Paul.
Yeah, again, I concur with Joel. I run LeafLogix in our medical side currently. It's a great program. Again, as Joel has said, it does glitch out. We don't have to pay monthly, we do pay a fee, but we don't pay a state fee. We don't pay for plant tags. I think that's something that would bother me if we did switch over for every plant. But again, Joel's kind of nailed it right on the head. What I wanted to say was that there needs to be some sort of record keeping system for the rest of these retail stores and caregivers. There is a lot of diversion out there, whether we want to admit it or not. And the record keeping is terrible for lots of these, whether they're small or large. But we see it all the time. And again, I think if it's going to happen, it should happen across the board, whether you're small or large. It should be fair right across the board if Metric system was to come on board.
Great. I saw, Catherine, you raised your hand. We're on pretty good time, so I will get to you after Paul. But this is just me saying, if you have more to add to this conversation after Catherine, please don't raise your hand, and please just let me know. You can ping me in the message and we can find time to follow up. So Paul.
So I guess to help me, try to, come up with a solution for, what the department's looking for and what for everyone in this group's looking for. What data does OMP need?
In the context of what?
In the context of a tracking system.
Again, the tracking system would just, with an eye towards the testing piece. That's why it's narrowly focused on the stores and the dispensaries. Really being the only way to 100% transparently ensure that testing regime would be followed would be Metric. To other people's points, there could be some type of paper record, but that turns into a kind of a trust system. It would be very difficult to get trust but verify. So as a regulator, it makes me a little uncomfortable, but it's all good feedback from everybody.
Just because with what the majority of the group seemed to be proposing when it came down to testing is the idea that there would be tested product, and then people would be able to label stuff if they did not have a test result to correspond with
Yep.
that. How would that work with the tracking system?
Yeah, I think it would still work the same way that the proposal was outlined, more or less, but that's why we're having this conversation. So, Catherine.
I don't know that I'm actually adding a whole lot more to this. I'm sorry. I'm arguing with people in my head and I need to say it out loud. Again, the testing, I've been doing it since before it was legal to do it, when companies were coming up here and getting it and taking it across state lines themselves. And so I do believe that testing is good for me to make my products better for my patients. My patients are determining what I test and what I don't test. I've actually had people come in looking for tested flour. They wanted to see the test results that went with the flour. And when I told them that this particular batch had not yet been tested, they chose not to purchase it. So on my end, as a store owner, that pushes me to want to get that testing done sooner than later. But that's me as a store owner and the market driving it. I do 100% believe that we need to have it say that the product has not been tested in a clear label if we're not. I think that we're going back and forth on regulations that don't necessarily need to exist and that we might be wasting time on. I mean, maybe not, because this is helping you guys see that we're wasting time doing it. I just did my credentials for Metric and it's horrible. It's a horrible software. And I cannot believe other states, I'm guessing there's very few to choose from. And that's why the states have it. And once you get into a couple, it kind of spreads, well, they're using it, so it must be okay. There's a lot of useless information. There's a lot of double, triple doing the same thing. And if you do it on the plant side, because caregivers are vertically integrated, I think that in states that really might use Metric more, they're not necessarily vertically integrated. Like I'm a storefront or I'm a grower, and you have your little section that you have to do. I'm looking at this like I have got to hire somebody full time to work in my garden to do the Metric, and then somebody in my store to do Metric. And I'm really concerned about the direction that we're going, and putting regulations in place just because adult use has it, or putting regulations in place because other states have it. Maine has done very well for the past 10 years without it. And while I see some need, I'm concerned.
Barry, can I put you on the spot as far as if we were to do testing without an inventory tracking system, do you think there's a way for the state registrants and labs to get to a place where we would be able to accurately track those back to certain packages to make sure that it's just, if something is labeled as tested or doesn't have a not tested label, do you, in your opinion, is there a way for, again, the registrant, the state and labs to be able to verify? Or is it just we're trust that you're doing the right thing here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure how it works on your end, so it's hard for me to answer that question. I don't know how it works on our end. I do know that we send our results not only to Metric, but also to the main CDC.
Yep.
I don't know if you guys could create a database there that would somehow help, or if we could send it to another. I know there's other tracking systems out there besides Metric. I don't know if any of them are any better. I know there's a group in Maine that are actually working to create a batch tracking kind of mechanism. It's a group that Greg, one of my co-founders, is a part of as well,
Yep.
trying to create some other form of tracking besides Metric. So I know there are other avenues. Can it be done without a tracking system? Again, it's hard. I say it's hard for me to answer because I don't know
Yep.
what you guys are looking at on your end. I'd have to see that to understand. I think it could be done. Sure.
Josh, and then we'll put a bow on it.
Yeah, so just hopping in on I think what you're laying out, Eric, is that without any type of tracking system, test results have no way of being connected to the batch that they came from. Meaning, if there's no tracking, then any good test result could be applied to any batch, and there wouldn't be a quick or easy way to see that that had happened. And any bad result could be left off or swapped out for a good result without anybody checking further. And so that would, in that scenario, you would need something like what Barry was just talking about, with kind of a central repository of data that the state would manage, to be able to kind of go back and search for products that had consumer complaints against them or something like that. Or sorry, to find, failing test results. But if there's no way to tie the actual batch to the result it came from, then the testing's fairly meaningless, I think is what we're trying to say there.
Much more eloquently put than I could ever imagine.
We do collect the batch information and associate it in our system with the test result.
Right.
Well, I'm sure there's got to be another way of doing this besides metric.
Well, right, but if there's yeah, I agree, and I'll throw my hand up and say I also very much dislike metric. It is cumbersome. It's a pain in the butt. I agree. There's got to be a better way. Except that it seems like all the software platforms for this industry have pretty serious problems. But regardless of whether it's metric or something else, if you don't have those two pieces tied together, then even if the batch number that originally goes to the lab is accurate, there's no way to make sure that same batch number isn't changed or have a different test result applied to it by the time that the product gets to a retail store.
Barry, can I just clarify that the test results go to metric in the main CDC?
Did you hear
I'm
that,
sorry.
Barry? Yeah.
You're asking me. I'm sorry. I thought you were asking Eric. I'm sorry.
Oh.
Yes, they do.
Thanks.
Yeah, metric is kind of the repository for those results. In order for it to move through the system, and the May CDC is the one that kind of analyzes those results and spots trends, yada, yada, yada. I could try to speak to it, but I would sound like an idiot. Perfect.
So just with the idea of trying to have some sort of some tracking with any sort of test results, whether the testing's mandated or not, would that be something that could be reported to the state? Like a test result, could it be attached to like a batch number that would be then reported to a state at a certain interval?
I mean, I think these are all questions that we would have to work through. It sounds like another working group to me. Hopefully a little bit of a smaller one to be able to get to any type of like very detailed, eloquent solution. But it sounds like it's just something that we're going to have to talk about. So at this point, I'll push it to a vote. As far as again, understanding that there might be an array of opinions here, I want to make sure that we capture everybody's vote, everybody's thought process, everybody's feedback and recommendation. But it seems like the majority consensus is kind of coalesced around no use of inventory tracking system, i.e. metric, with those storefronts or dispensaries with an eye towards capturing those test results. So if that's your vote, can we raise your hand now?
I'm sorry. Could you read?
I'm the only with my hand up. So did I?
I was like,
I guess I'm
that's not the
confused
way
too.
that I thought it was
No
going to happen.
metric?
Yeah.
I heard
I
no
don't
metric.
understand the question.
Yeah. What's the motion?
It sounds like the proposal that we put forward, it sounds like it's not popular. It sounds like the majority consensus is coalescing around no metric. So if that's the way you feel, I guess the vote would be metric. And then to Joel's point, kind of a way to formalize record keeping where that work would continue to be able to validate or verify test results. Is that clear?
Okay. So no metric, but some system that could be used to have testing. I got it. I'm in.
No metric, but use tracking.
No metric, but we'll figure out an eloquent solution to be able to verify or validate test results to the best we can.
Without mandated test, but not
mandated
mandated testing.
That was a different vote. Again, these are not like,
So this is it just because that's the thing is like I could get behind the idea of having additional record keeping that doesn't include a mandate, like a testing mandate.
okay, we already took the vote and we have we'll have the different reports to have to do with testing. This is specific to the inventory track, like electronic tracking. Has nothing to do with testing. Think of it that way. So there's no metric with some more formalized record keeping. We'll leave it at that.
No testing involved with this. Just a better record keeping system.
No testing mandate.
Now I'm confused.
Eric, make it so it's just basically a vote on a no to metric and leave it
There
at
you go.
that.
No to metric. Keep your hands up. Okay. Is there anybody that did not vote? No, look at that. All right. And how about a vote to follow that up to Joel's point, a way that we can standardize record keeping for, again, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, an eye towards more of those commercial entities, the caregiver storefronts, and the dispensaries, with an eye towards possibly finding a way to trust and then verify test results.
I don't know. I'm not sure what you're saying though.
I mean, that's the point. It would have to be another smaller working group to figure out exactly what that means.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess Dave, I guess the way that I just flying by the seat of my pants right now, as I could imagine, is that you'd be able to do some sort of batch tracking, and then that batch would have to be specifically connected to a test result, and that information would somehow go to the state.
I'm thinking, yeah, I don't know. It could be a number of things. Maybe it's more in-depth paper reporting that we can standardize a form that would give us the ability to do that. It could be an Excel. I don't know what it is, Paul. It would just, something would need to change, because the way that record keeping happens in this program now, it would basically be like, we're just going to have to trust that you actually did test this when you're telling us that you tested it.
I could support like the state coming up with a standardized reporting method, like we have a standardized sales tax reporting. So like every participant in the program would have to declare X, Y, or Z every month. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Chris, you got a question?
Yeah, I just speak to Joel's point there. I do see, again, from my perspective, where a standardness to how you got to keep your documentation would be beneficial from the municipal end as well. I guess maybe I would have been the one yay or nay vote to the metric, but I do hear you guys as a group, and it wouldn't be the first time I've heard out that metric can be cumbersome. So, but I do think to speak to Joel's point on the kind of a standard to what information you need to keep or how you need to keep that information is going to go a long way from kind of where we're at right now, in my opinion.
And Catherine, I think you do have your hand up. Fire away.
As far as the record keeping, I'm following the Department of Ag rules on the edible side of things that we're making. Anything that we're doing in the kitchen, there's already rules as far as tracking batches and lot numbers. So we're already keeping that, and I suggest to all caregivers that I talk to, that I consult with, that they keep a notebook. So if the state ever came in, and I tell them, if Department of Ag came in, they wanted to see my book, somebody got sick, they can see the batch numbers. It's in my book already. I have it. And I believe at the beginning of the testing law back in 2017, we talked about those who were putting any type of results on their labels. If you say it's 20 milligrams or you say it's 25%, you must have a test to back it up. So that you would have to give it a batch number. And then in my book, I have my Nelson Analytic or Nova test results, and that test result matches that batch number, so that we have that record keeping ability. I have it on site. If it's ever needed, it can be pulled up. I'm using it for the patient's health and safety. and for me to be able to corroborate everything that I'm saying. I'm not using it as a compliance tool. And these paper copies can be done. All industries and manufacturers that are doing such have to have this already. So why are we trying to recreate the wheel? We don't need to.
I would argue the point where, I mean, our compliance team will go into 10 registrants in a week, and the reporting is anywhere from scribbled on a napkin to what Joel says, like professional Excel workbooks or whatever. So my point is to get at the root of trying to bring some validity to testing results in the batches that are accounted to those. There needs to be some type of formalized or standardized tracking. But I don't think at this point it's necessarily a vote. We can go back and kind of recapture this conversation in a report back as far as this is the direction we're going, and this is what we think we would need in order to do that. And obviously, it's already become terribly apparent. To figure that out, there needs to be more discussions and more conversations to be able to figure out and capture exactly what that would look like. So before we move on, does anybody want to add anything into this conversation?
I mean, I think it's just a good idea to possibly have another, a group, maybe even the same group, to talk about how we can, have some sort of standardized declaration to the state, some sort of standardized system that makes it easy for the people who are participating in the market to know what's expected for the regulators and what the regulators expect from the market participants.
Yeah, and what's that, Dave? No, go for it.
I would just add to Paul's, I think that's a wonderful thing too for strong operators. We want to be known in the state, right? There's been some tough times recently, right? And those of us that are doing things the way that we should be doing them, I think that's exactly what we want to have, right? And bring this industry forward. And I think Paul's comment is great. I think it's a great statement. Yep.
Yeah, and I will say, Sean, I see your hands up. We'll get to you, then we'll move on. But to your point, Paul, as far as continued stakeholder engagement, I don't think it will be this group necessarily. But some of the closing remarks that I have at the end is, again, that commitment to having those conversations ongoing in whatever form they may manifest themselves, because we've certainly seen the value, and I hope everybody around this table has seen the value in having these conversations. So, Sean.
Yeah, when referring to Paul's and Dave's and now your comment as far as the using this group again, I would also agree with you, Eric, that I'm not speaking for every patient, but patients don't care how you get the testing done, just can you make sure that testing's done. Patients don't care how you get the tracking done, but can you figure out some sort of tracking? So getting patients like myself back into something like this where you're figuring out the fine details might not be necessary. It needs to get down to the people within the industry that are actually doing the grunt work. Patients just want it to get done.
And I appreciate that. And again, I think that's right. And that's why we're all here and having those conversations again for the patients. So we appreciate that, Sean. All right, moving along, still doing decent, a little bit behind. I wanted to continue the conversation around the local control. I think we've touched upon it at a couple different meetings, maybe the second and third. I did have a follow-up conversation with both Chris and Rebecca, which is on the website, which you can watch now. And they spoke to their experience from their perspective as far as working with municipalities in this regard. So I wanted to bring it back. We originally had a conversation, and it seemed like there might have been majority consensus or consensus around the fact some of these larger operators, in order for Chris and Rebecca in towns to be able to do their job and do what they needed to do, they needed to, at the very least, understand who within their borders is an operator. Is that a fair representation, Chris and or Rebecca? And do you want to expand upon that? Because I thought we did have a great conversation, and I want to make sure that this group see if we can't get to some level of consensus, a way to ensure the program's working both for our registrants and in municipalities. Kind of putting you on the spot again. I apologize.
No, that's fine. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that The bottom line of it all, I think for municipalities is that I think they're seeking information that is difficult to find or to obtain about certain activity in town. And I think that does lead to some of the confusion that's frustrating for everybody about what is authorized and what's not. So if there was some way through the rulemaking process to clarify what information is accessible to municipalities or facilitate that information transfer, I do think that, some of those, confusion and frustration issues would resolve a little bit. So, yeah.
Thank you. David.
I'm sure this is not an easy proposition, but I've been thinking about all the various industries out there, and I can't think of another industry where there's an opt-in in Maine. And I may be wrong. So if someone knows of that, tell me otherwise. I just can't. Now I know there's certainly communities that opt out of things. So yeah, Rebecca, if you want to, maybe you should jump right in on that.
The local liquor option, alcohol. Every town was a dry town until the municipalities decided to allow alcohol into their towns. And I think that the opt-in model was based on the local liquor option.
Wow. Guess more towns like alcohol than marijuana. That's a shame.
Well, I think it's also new. I don't know. We can give it some time.
Yeah.
So I can just speak to the fact that the opt-in versus opt-out is unique to Maine. I've yet to find any other state that requires an opt-in. Most of them, it's opt-out.
Susan.
Yeah, I get concerned that someone running a home-based business that really doesn't interfere with the community, which there are many of us who really don't interfere with the community, versus a storefront is a different scenario where that's kind of equivalent to opening a liquor store, for example, in which you do need an opt-in. And I happen to live in one town in Maine that hasn't opted into liquor yet. So I just don't feel that they should be able to say that I can't run this business from my home I don't even have retail traffic, for example. So I would be concerned about providing municipalities with a list. Hey, these are the people operating in your community. I would be concerned that they would attempt to shut down caregivers who really aren't interfering in the community, such as myself, and are delivering all across Maine for pediatric meds or whatever they're doing. But I don't know. I just like to see this carefully analyzed before we remove the confidentiality clauses in Title 22.
So I want to let Catherine I want to let Rebecca respond to that. Then I'll go to Catherine.
Well, I guess I just wanted to clarify what protections are already available to small caregivers in the law. And I think that Susan, you might have been the one that identified this provision in the beginning, one of the beginning of work groups.
Yes.
There's an opt-in provision for caregiver retail stores, dispensaries, manufacturing facilities, and testing facilities. Municipalities can't prohibit caregivers generally. And I think that is
right.
An issue that we do try and stress every time we advise municipalities about this. So the additional information wouldn't be for the purpose of allowing municipalities to shut down caregiver operations that they don't have the power to opt in or to prohibit already. I think it's more from a land use perspective, understanding the activity. If a caregiver is operating out of their home, I think that some towns might be interested in applying some sort of home occupation permit for that. And the reason for that might be maybe a traffic related issue or other land use related issues that a home occupation, somebody that's operating a business out of their home, there might be some land use issues attached to that it would be important for the municipality to know. And that's not unique to caregivers. There are a lot of people that have to apply for a home occupation license for things that they do out of their house. But it is important to stress that the information wouldn't be to shut down caregivers. They can't do that anyways. They can't do that.
Thank you. Catherine?
We're seeing some of the issues around the municipalities actually compounding now. And the concern is that home-based caregivers that are, as Susan had mentioned, they're working out of their home, but they don't have any traffic. So some municipalities are concerned about traffic, and they say you can't have a home occupancy in residential areas because they're concerned about traffic. Well, that's not part of this. Well, that's just the way it is Augusta is one of them. That in the downtown residential area, they gave a sunset clause to caregivers to actually stop doing their business in their homes and relocate their businesses someplace in a properly zoned area. Well, that's not even feasible for some caregivers, and apparently until it's tested in court, it's going to stand. Again, the small home-based caregiver doesn't have the money to take it to court. So that's a concern. Some caregivers are not growing. All they do is they purchase wholesale and then they sell retail to the consumers, like in the deliveries services, that there's no impact to their homes, but on the state website application, it's asking for some permission from your town. So I'm getting calls constantly asking, well, what do I have to get from my town? Because I don't have to license. I'm not doing a storefront, and that my town isn't opting in. So there's nothing that they can get. So they think they can't even fill out an application to become a caregiver because their town won't give them anything and they need something to submit to the state. So I would recommend that maybe OMP take that part off the application, because it's not part of what they really have to put in there, and it's very confusing for people. And again, the list of caregivers per municipality, that was something that was talked about years ago, and the state has been very good at protecting the privacy of the caregivers, because some caregivers do have their supply at their home and they would be afraid of crime rates or whatever, attracting people to rob them by publicizing it. And there have been towns that publicize, like the town meetings, and you're going out there saying, yes, I'm at 662 Stanley Road and this is what I do, and this is put out there for everybody, and it's not necessarily the safest for us. So I would use caution in expanding anything as far as municipalities with the home-based caregivers, but with the retail stores, the labs, commercial manufacturing or commercial growing, of course, like any other business should be regulated as towns regulate their other businesses.
Great. Does anybody have anything else they would like to share on this front? I will say, as people think about it, at least from our perspective, I'm glad that we are having this conversation, because this has been kind of a source of conflict here, trying to find what that balance is between municipalities and those that operate in the program. So I'm thrilled that we're having this open, honest dialogue about it right now. But anybody else? Okay. I don't know. It seems like, well, the lack of conversation here about it, I don't know if this is the right move or not, but at least go to some type of vote to see if there is any consensus as far as where we should fall with registrants in municipalities, and the ability for Office of Marijuana Policy to, at the very least, share that information with towns. I think Catherine brings up a good point about there still being some need for confidentiality there, kind of the way that we handle some of our adult use licensees information. When you're specifically talking about cultivation and manufacturing, we, at least from the state perspective, we never share those addresses for the reasons that Catherine highlighted. But do people feel comfortable? And I guess we can take this to vote and keep it as simple as possible. And again, just 100% clarity, we can make sure that we capture everybody's feedback, opinion, vote. So this is not just one and done. People that support the Office of Marijuana Policy being able to share registrant information with municipalities, with that eye towards keeping certain information confidential between those two parties. for the reasons that Catherine brought up. Are people supportive of that?
As long as there's no mandated testing. Sorry, I'm just throwing that in there as a joke.
All right, good.
Just
I'm putting you
really
on mute,
small.
Sean. Putting you on mute. Can you keep your hands up if people are comfortable with that approach? And I know there's going to be divided opinions here. So David, just give me an indication when you've captured. Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the way that you proposed it. I'm sorry.
Is some high-level proposal where OMP would be allowed to share registrant information with municipalities while maintaining some level of confidentiality, to your point about not wanting addresses out there, understanding that there is that chance of increased break-in or harm or crime around it? So did you capture names and totals? Okay. And it's before we go to the next part, I will go to Josh and John.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So in general, I do support that notion, but I think that the concerns that Catherine brought up and that Susan brought up are pretty well founded. And so, as you said, Eric, keeping the privacy concerns front and center, particularly when we're talking about people's homes.
Yeah.
And second, also using this as an opportunity to re-clarify for municipalities which types of licenses and operations they are able to regulate additionally to the state rules, and which types of licenses are really just like a pass through. Okay, you're there, you're doing your business, you're not bothering anybody, keep doing what you're doing. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me, absolutely. Chris.
I'll just chime in real quick. And, that is, I heard a couple different times, they'll use it for enforcement or to go out and find these people. One of most of the interactions that I end up having with caregivers, it becomes almost an education on, hey, I'm all set at the state level. What is it that I need to do to be okay at the municipal level? In some cases, we've worked with those individuals to, they had to license with us as a cultivation, which is a different name for a license type than what they had at the state level. So I do think it affords that opportunity to have some of those conversations as well.
And from Chris and Rebecca's standpoint, I mean, does what I'm saying as far as what that first proposal is make sense to you, as far as where we can share that information with you folks, that you're able to do your jobs, yet still keeping certain pieces confidential for all of the great reasons that have brought up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I was thinking about how this would work through the rulemaking process, there's already language in the statute that allows code enforcement officers and other municipal officials to contact OMP for information related to a specific caregiver operation or, alleged caregiver operation, just to verify that there's a registration attached to it, or some sort of property if they have a location that they're trying to figure out if there's a caregiver operating there. And included in that statutory language, it says that code enforcement officers or municipal officials can obtain the information necessary to ensure that the conduct there is authorized under their registration. So I think that within the rulemaking process, there can be some sort of clarification about what information can be shared within that term, like what is authorized conduct, and I don't necessarily think that, confidentiality would be harmed by a caregiver understanding whether or not a caregiver operating out of their house is also manufacturing. And that's important for municipalities to know too, because there is, an opt-in provision for manufacturing facilities. So, and if a caregiver is operating out of their home using inherently hazardous substances, that's something that the municipality has the authority to opt into. And that's, so all of that is, I think, non-confidential information, important information for municipalities to know, and something that can be accessible to municipalities without a statute change.
Fair. Catherine.
So one of the things that I think that we're confusing, when Rebecca was mentioning about the manufacturing, it would be helpful to know if a caregiver is manufacturing in their house. When a house-based caregiver is manufacturing, they're cooking in their kitchen. It's different than having a manufacturer's license. The municipalities, if they have a concern on what a caregiver is doing, they can go to them and ask to see their license. What is your card? Your card tells you I'm a caregiver. As a caregiver, I am allowed to cultivate. I'm allowed to manufacture, which means I'm basically cooking in my kitchen, and I'm allowed to take care of my patients. So we're integrated with three things in one. Whereas there is a manufacturer's license, there is a grower's license, there's different licenses for the bigger operations. If you're going to have a retail storefront, then yes, the town needs to be able to regulate that. If you're going to have a manufacturing facility, the town needs to be able to regulate that. But a home-based caregiver is a home-based caregiver. And I did it for years in my home where we had a small cultivation in the garage. I took the flour into my kitchen and I made my edibles, and then I took it out and I delivered it to my patients. There was no impact to my town. Yes, I did have a home occupancy license just for the fun of it, but a concern is if you're giving the towns that ability, some towns do publish information. They publish their meetings, they publish their lists, it becomes public knowledge. And I would be 100% against that. Not to make it more difficult for municipalities, but because I've been on the other side of it and it's very concerning.
Yeah, and to your point, that first proposal again would come with the caveat that certain information still remain confidential. Again, trying to find that fine balance of removing this. Well, no, I don't want to say conflict is not the right word, but to have a program that works for all stakeholders having this conversation. Heather, and then I'm going to try to put a bow on this because we still got to talk about the rule document and the report back.
Yeah, real quick, the feedback from the code enforcement officer from my municipality is that they would like to know who has a caregiver cultivation license in town. So when people call and complain about odor, they can say that person is licensed. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Yep. So we do have that first roll call, basically just allowing OMP to share that information about registrants with towns in order to address certain things like Heather brings up and allow municipalities to do their job with that caveat of retaining a certain level of confidentiality for registrants. Somebody that didn't vote for that proposal, does somebody want to bring out, at least give us their thoughts or their feeling, their position, so we can capture that in our report back?
I would be okay with anything that's going to be commercial grow, commercial manufacturing, or a retail storefront.
The problem with that, Catherine, how would we define a commercial grow? Obviously, retail storefront is easy enough. What would you define as a commercial grow?
That I've rented a facility, like I have a warehouse or I have a commercial building.
Okay, so the address that's registered with the state is not like your dwelling unit or residence.
Correct.
Okay. I don't believe Susan, and I can't remember who voted. Does that sound like a proposal that you would support?
It sounds like what's already in the law. The law states that you can't divulge a caregiver information to the towns as a list, but you can confirm when a town asks, hey, is Susan a caregiver? You can confirm yes or no.
I think, and people can tell me if I'm wrong, we're kind of flipping that on its head, whereas we will be able to provide them with those that are operating in Catherine's proposal, a commercial cultivation, manufacturing, or storefront. So they wouldn't have to.
But I believe you already can. You can't provide them a list of just caregivers who are operating out of their home, but you can provide a town, they have to have clearance for a manufacturing facility, for example. And that's already the law.
Okay. So for Catherine's proposal, do people support Catherine's proposal?
Julie? Just to make sure that if it's a caregiver operation that is not at the person's main primary residence.
Yep.
That information could be shared by OMP to the town.
Yes.
how would the town not know that in the first place? Because wouldn't you have to go through all the code and whatnot? Is that?
Yeah, Chris, you want to speak to that?
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And we find them every day, or they find us every day.
Okay, well, that see, there you go. So I mean, these are sometimes, all right, so, yeah, I'm in support of that. I mean, it just seems like,
Okay.
yeah.
We can go back and try to capture all of this. Susan, are you in support of that, or did you?
Yes, if I'm understanding it correctly, it's how the law already reads, and yes, I'm in support of the law as it currently reads.
Yeah, I don't think
So
that's
here's my
what we're
hand.
saying. Okay, yeah. I don't think, I just want to make sure we're perfectly clear. I don't think that's what we're saying here.
Okay,
So, Town A, the Office of Marijuana Policy could freely share a list of caregivers operating a commercial cultivation, a commercial manufacturing, or a retail store, so long as it's operating outside of their primary residence. Town A wouldn't have to pick up the phone and say, hey, OMP, we need to know if there is a registrant at 108 Main Street. Are we all clear on that? I just want to, I have to be clear on that. Okay. John.
Well, just for instance, you can have a residential home on a commercial site, which then you could put up a commercial grow, but that wouldn't be shared that you wouldn't have to share that to the town. So I have a resident, well, I had a residence in a commercial zone that had plenty of property to put up a commercial grow or manufacturing. So I think if I'm right, what Catherine's saying is if it's at your residence, but you had a separate building behind your residence, would that be shared or would not be shared to the town?
That's a great question for Catherine.
As much as I hate to say, if it's a commercial building, then probably yes. The problem being is a lot of people are putting up commercial grows and even retail stores without going through any of the town authorities. Either they just don't know that it's required, or they're trying to skirt it. So, yeah. I don't know. That's kind of a gray area.
Yeah. Well, luckily, again, I think we can capture this conversation, give it back to the legislature, and then they obviously would have the time to go through and put any meat on the bones as far as detail is concerned. But I think we can capture this conversation and put it in the report back. Does anybody want to add anything to this conversation? A voice to be captured before we go on to talk about any proposed rule? Look at that. I think we're good. Okay. So did everybody have the opportunity? Did everybody receive an email, the approach to 2022 rulemaking? And if not, it's also on the website. So I don't know the best way to approach this conversation, but I hope everybody has the chance, if they haven't already, to read that document. And it basically outlines our philosophy and our approach to potential 2020 rulemaking for the program based off of these conversations that we had, with substantive conversations such as the track and trace, or more just general approach with patient access, education. And I just want to be perfectly clear when we talk about what to expect from the rules. This is a very important part, not only for this group, but people watching. So we've been completely clear and transparent moving forward that we combined basically two processes into one, because it's hard to have one conversation without the other, about report backs to the legislature that require statutory changes, and also consulting with a group that would inform rulemaking. So a lot of the things that we've taken substantive votes on aren't going to be in the rule. I just want to make sure that we're 100% clear on that. And the two that we call out as examples in the document are anything to do with testing, this voluntary testing and labeling, or something like the pediatric patient certification process would not be in the rule. It would be in the report back, because we don't have statutory authority to write regulations around that. Is that clear to everybody in the working group? And I would love to ask the audience watching, but I just want to make sure that we differentiate those two. it looks like we have a fair understanding of that. So I think the best way to approach this is if you had the opportunity to look at it, at a high level, we gave bullet points as far as our approach, what you can expect not to be in that draft rule, potential draft rule based off our experiences earlier this year, and items that we look forward, or I don't say look forward to, that will be in any proposed 2022 rule. So I'm happy to take feedback, thoughts, comments, concerns, again, with an eye towards making sure that at the end of the day, we can move forward with a rule that extracts as much value out of this process as possible, with the caveat understanding that it's not going to be possible to move forward with a rule that has 100% consensus across the board, but that's why we have the rulemaking process and also the legislative process as well. So I turn it over to anybody that wants to provide feedback or has any additional questions. Dave.
Yeah, real quick. So what will be contained in the rule? The registered caregiver will be limited to one cultivation area. Just, do you mind elaborating on that, just so?
Yeah, so I think it's just clarity that's never been in the rule before. When the caregiver registers with the state, they give us the address of where their authorized conduct, in particular, their cultivation activities, going to occur. We want to make sure that it's happening at that actual location. So if I'm a caregiver and I am a 30-60 grower, I don't grow 10 plants at 3 different locations, essentially is what it's getting at.
Flowering plants or vegetative plants are all encompassing?
Great question. I think it would be all encompassing as far as being cultivating would be in that one cultivation area.
Okay. I think, okay.
Paul and then Susan.
I'll defer to Susan for the time being.
Sure. Susan.
When I read this, my concern was that in the proposed rules in January, we talked about a contiguous space, and that concerned me because a lot of caregivers may keep an indoor nursery and then move to outdoor for summer grow or a greenhouse, for example. So I'd just be concerned about the word contiguous. Otherwise, I could support that.
Notated. Thank you. Julie.
Just 2 quick things on that bullet points that you sent out. I don't see any language going back to stating that there would be allowance for any digital medical marijuana certification cards to be used in the interim. So I'd like to just see that bullet point added so that the legislature can consider allowing that process, like we've talked about repeatedly. And then there was a bullet point that says most language related to Maine-based patients and medical providers will be removed from the rule, with statutory language serving as the guide. I don't understand exactly what that's saying. Could you just clarify that for me a little bit, please?
Okay, so first, for the digital certification, that requires a statutory change, so we could not put it into our regulations. So we're going to put that in the report back to the legislature to make that change, and then hopefully go into another session of rulemaking to be able to incorporate that into the regs. The second one is there was a lot of focus, a lot of consternation when it came to any regulations when it as far as the patient certification process. And what was the second one? In the medical provider section. So we've boiled that down. What in the regs is going to be basically a reference to statute. That's it. Until we have the opportunity again to capture kind of the conversations that we've had about your experience in the report back to the legislature before there's any additional regulations put around those processes. Yep. Paul.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I mean, it looks like you definitely have, have listened to what the criticisms of the rules were before, from this working group and from the legislative hearings and stuff. I kind of have the same, concerns I think that David and Susan had with the caregivers being limited to one space. When we're talking language clarifying the exceptions to authorized conduct that apply to visiting qualifying patients accessing Maine's cannabis, is that just basically saying they can't cultivate, or is that saying something else about them accessing it?
Yeah, I think that's actually just codifying that change in statute into the rules. As
And
far
then,
as conduct by visiting qualifying patients.
Yeah, and then have you guys thought about how long you'd want to have the data stored for security cameras for caregiver retail stores and dispensaries?
I think the last proposal was 30 days, which I believe, I mean, a lot of these details, we've obviously had to finish this work before we went back, but at a high level, we wanted to capture this, but I think 30 days, don't hold me to that.
And then when it says language clarifying the type of business entity registered caregivers may operate, in light of the recent availability of dispensary registrations, I guess can you provide any more details on that?
That's getting back to the fact and bringing to a head the idea that a caregiver is an individual that's allowed to organize as a business entity versus a dispensary that can be a business entity that's licensed.
So if a caregiver is registered in a business way and then the rule goes into effect, how I guess I'm just trying to think about how that could affect people who might have a different structure than just being a sole proprietor caregiver.
Yeah, no, it's going to be, I mean, those are one of the contentious points, and we've asked the legislature in the past multiple times to help alleviate that problem by redefining caregiver. But our interpretation and the Office of the Attorney General's interpretation is the fact that a caregiver is an individual that has is authorized to organize as a business entity. So any business entity that they organized as, so that it actually lines up with the language in the law, would be that sole proprietorship. Believe me, the first round, we got a ton of feedback about that, but we're kind of in a place where there's no other way to interpret it. So I'm sure we'll have that conversation because the rules are major substantive. The conversation will come up in front of the legislature and they can do what they want with it.
Yeah. And then I guess finally, is that saying, under the timeline for rulemaking. So, we're saying that between March and April of 22 is a legislative review and process. And so that's the idea of like the public hearing before the legislature, et cetera.
Yeah, we would have to go through the typical MAPA process, whereas we'd have to get a rule together, get it published, go through a public hearing, make the tweaks from the comments that we received.
I think we lost you, Eric.
Did I mute?
Yeah, we lost you for a minute. Yeah, no, I understand that process. So when would you expect the rules to take effect if the legislature approves them in April?
Great question. So if the rules took effect, it would depend, and Gabby is going to get after me if I get this wrong, but if they were adopted with an emergency preamble, it would go into effect as soon as the legislature passed them. If not, I believe they go into effect 90 days after, and that's adjournment. I think this is a really important piece too, because I'm sure we're going to come across this again if we do adhere to these timelines and move forward with some type of 2022 rulemaking. We realize that there's going to be changes to the program. There's going to be changes that affect registrants and how they operate. I don't think we've given any type of indication the way that we've conducted ourselves on the compliance side. I don't want anybody to think that day one, we're going to come in, do an inspection and say, you're not adhering to the new rules and shut down a caregiver operation or a dispensary. There is obviously the understanding that there will be a level of technical assistance as people are able to transition into that space. So I don't know if that's exactly what you're getting at, but just to make sure that point is clear.
Yeah, my main concern is just how the day-to-day operations of a vertically integrated caregiver who has a kitchen, a storefront will work. So when we're talking about packaging requirements, people are ordering packaging 180 days ahead of time. And then so you're going to want to exhaust all of the packaging that you have in stock before you restock with new, possibly compliant packaging. Any sort of changes to the program that you'll need to be able to train your staff on. If you're talking about having security systems installed, if you don't do it yourself, having to set up a contractor do it. That's just all of those things that I'm looking at from the real practical standpoint.
I mean, we realize those changes would be there. We bring it back to the human element. We understand you can't snap your fingers and magically be compliant with any type of new sets of rules. So we totally understand that.
Yeah. Would there be any, stomach from the department to be able to remove some of the standards of record keeping that are needed for employees, because that stuff's usually covered by the Department of Labor. So the idea of there being like an employee file. And so you guys understand, where I'm coming from, is I'm coming from a lens of trying to have at least the least redundancy as possible across state agencies. And so if the Department of Labor deals with something, hopefully the Office of Marijuana Policy won't make us have to do the same thing again. Because again, this document, I think, again, really shows that you have, listened to what people, have said when you're saying what will not be in the rules and what to expect in the rules. But that's one part that really sticks out to me, is just maintaining employee files, it's just paperwork. It's busy work.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think it serves, a purpose if the person is already registered with you.
Paul, I love it. Get into the real nitty gritty details of any proposed rule. I've written it down for sure.
And then I guess just, the final part, and this may not be the part for the rulemaking, but when it comes to testing, is would there be the ability for the state, for the state to be able to research and set a standard that then all program participants would follow, or would that be something that really wouldn't be in the rules and that'd be more of a statutory suggestion?
Not quite follow. Can you just repeat the question and maybe I'll get it the second time?
So it's the idea that, the state would have to set a standard for what testing is, all the labs, do, and then be able to research that. But I don't know, I guess that, now that I'm saying it out loud, I don't think that's something that would fall under the rulemaking.
Yeah, no, I mean,
This
some of these
subject matter.
testing proposals are recommendations or information we'll give to the legislature, but there will certainly need to be a rulemaking aspect to testing for sure.
All right. Yes, and thank you. And this has been helpful, very helpful.
Okay, cool. David.
Eric, just, for those that may not be watching and may not be certain on, obviously we've talked about a lot in these meetings. It's been wonderful, I think, for all participants. And again, thank you to everybody, and thank you for your time and the OMP, the Office of Marijuana Policy's time. Let's just say hypothetically that, we, from our conversations, that it's recommended that some form of testing with, maybe a label, just what we just voted on, right? And it seemed pretty unanimous. What would that look like, so that, if you're a caregiver out there and you're watching this and you're like, okay, I may, like to Paul's point, I may at some point need to, if that was to go through, need to order labels, what would the labels look like? The state would have to identify what they look like, right? All these things. What would that look like? What would a timeline be, just so that, everyone's sort of all on the same page with those kinds of pieces of our conversations that we had?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of across the map, and there's no one size fits all answer to that question. Basically, to get to Paul's point and what he had said, the rule goes through, voted on by the legislature. It becomes law. It would be 90 days. So you'd have a 90-day grace period to understand some of the more broad changes that were coming that it may affect your ordering or purchasing patterns for labels. So you would have that lead time if those changes were to affect you. And again, speaking to the second part was, we understand that a caregiver or a dispensary employee or operator can't just snap their fingers and become compliant with some of these rule changes that are potentially coming down the pike because of how drastically out of date the 2018 rule is. And it's really just would be our approach to compliance, conducting ourselves the same way we have up to this point, where we would lead with technical assistance and work with individuals that are working to get a security system installed or working to get that new packaging. Obviously, as a regulator, at some point, you got to say, look, there's going to be a deadline eventually. We can't just do this for 4 or 5 years, right? But there would be that period where we would be a kind of a resource and a working partner in that transition.
Thank you.
Yeah. Catherine.
Sorry about that. So looking at this again, thank you. I do see that you're hearing what we've been saying. There's changes in here that look good. Hopefully other people can see them as well. One of my concerns is language clarifying the type of business registered entity. I know you just kind of mentioned that, but one of the things that from the very beginning, it's been that a caregiver has to apply as a caregiver individually. It's under my social security number. That's what I put on the caregiver application. The application has now changed and it asks for a federal ID number. You should take that right off the application, put it back to a social security number. Each caregiver is its own individual business and it follows the rules as an individual person. My business entity is for my taxing purposes, and whether I have Glenn and I both as caregivers and both of our individual caregiver licenses, the funds that we make flow up through our LLC. We have a combined LLC for our personal business, and I deal with my accountant on that. Sorry, my dog is excited. Grandkids are visiting. If you take it back to as far as our dealing with the state, it's individual, it's as an individual person with our social security numbers, not a business entity. An LLC should not be applying as a caregiver. The caregiver is the caregiver. Our LLC is our business entity and how we conduct ourselves, but our licensing with the state is an individual thing. I think we can save a lot of confusion and hassle doing it that way.
Yeah, and as far as current operations are concerned, I'm happy to have those conversations with you, Catherine, for sure. So I can make a note to follow up on you. But does anybody else have any comments, feedback? I realize this is not a draft of the rules, and I think we can all agree if we were to turn over a 60, 70, whatever it may be page document, that's really not a good exercise or it wouldn't have any value. But I'm hoping with these conversations, our general approach, large buckets of what will be in the rule and what will not, it is helpful. It meets your expectations as the working group, understanding if we were to move forward with the 2022 rule, it would still have two rulemaking processes, both with OMP as an agency and also as the legislature, to really get into nitty-gritty details. So I'm pleased most people seem okay with this. And then as far as the report back is concerned, so I think the best way to go about this is we want to capture in a full transparent way, be able to basically in a condensed way offer these conversations up to the legislatures in the way of findings, in the way of educating, and then really boil down some of these singular issues and present them as and capturing everybody's voices, particularly with the ones that we took the vote on. Basically saying we've had substantive conversations around testing or tracking or patient education or pediatric certification process. And this is where everybody falls on those spectrum. So not necessarily moving forward with a recommendation, but just letting them know that we had these substantive conversations. These are things that they may want to consider. Does that seem like an appropriate way to move forward with a report back or a document, trying to understand we're at like hour 12 or something of having these important conversations, but a way to capture these conversations and report back to the legislature? I just want to make sure that when we give that document over to that body, that it meets the expectations of this group. And again, you have my commitments in some of these conversations that could be more contentious. I don't want to use contention because I think we've done a really good job having respectful dialogue here, but making sure that we capture everybody's voice. So we're not leaving anybody out. So they have the full spectrum of the items and the substance we discussed. Catherine.
I'm sorry to be the thorn in your side.
No,
I think turning over a 50-page document to us before you put back to the legislature would be very useful, very helpful, and we can agree that we've at least read it and we have an idea before it even goes to a public comment or a public hearing.
Yep.
I would be more comfortable in agreeing or disagreeing, knowing the details, because it's the small details that can mess things up, and we don't know what those are. From the overview that you shared, it looks good, but again, that's not the details, so I don't know.
Okay, David?
I absolutely second what Catherine just said. And I think it's important too, because so many of us, have been active, right, in the community, in getting involvement with other folks that are caregivers, getting opinions and whatnot, that it puts more weight again for whatever comes out, that, you know, there's a preemptive, hi, we've seen this, you know, it takes away, there will always be people that don't like everything, right? And you just have to understand that in life, right? But I think that way it allows things to filter properly versus sometimes the hysterics that get behind things that are not necessarily true. And I think that might be helpful, Eric. Thank you.
Julie.
Yeah, I agree. I would love to see the document. And then we can, you know, if we have any specific questions, if we could be, you know, able to email back or just kind of have clarity so that we can just give a little bit of feedback, that would be fabulous.
Joel, were you raising your hand or were you waving at somebody in the room? Okay, just making sure. All right, so to understand, and I absolutely hear where everybody's coming from, we have to have the report back to the legislature by January 3rd. We haven't started drafting it yet because we needed to finish this conversation. Would people be comfortable with maybe not having a fully fleshed out, finalized 50-page report to go through a detail, but to again move forward with a document that's captures more high level, or are people looking for literally the full report and wanting to provide feedback on that document from 17 different people?
I think you need the whole report, Eric.
The full report.
Okay.
And it can be that we just email our response. You don't have to have it face to face.
Are people willing to go to bat for the Office of Marijuana Policy when we tell the legislature they can't have the report by January 3rd?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
We want to make sure that what gets presented is the best that we can do.
I agree with you. I just want if somebody gets upset about it, I'm just going to be like, you know what? These 17 people told me. No, okay.
Well, would we be able to just even like
You want us to email you so you have it in writing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just, you know, everyone, or even if we all just signed a letter that said, you know, with the idea that, you know, every, you know, work group member could review the report before, you know, the legislature needs it, request, blah, 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 blah.
I don't hate it. I just want to make sure that we can finish up our work. I totally get it. Okay. Rock and roll.
We got your back, Eric. We got your back.
I appreciate that. So does anybody have anything to add before I kind of wrap this up and put a bow on it? All right. Well, I just want to say, sincerely, this has been an eye-opening experience for us, myself and OMP, to fully understand the value that comes out of these stakeholder engagements. And I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times, I'll continue to say it, that you have a commitment, not only from me, but from the Office of Marijuana Policy, more or less to double down on this process. Basically get input from all stakeholders, whether it be industry on any new proposed rule, input from municipalities across the state as far as what they need from an educational aspect, from public health in ways that we can be doing things better. We are working through that process. We have been a way to more or less formalize it, get a cadence from year to year to continue to have these conversations. And it's certainly going to evolve over time, whether it be on a singular issue or on a more universal approach to the program. I hope everybody shares that feeling that there has been value in this process, because I know OMP certainly has. I mean, we came in saying, hey, we missed the mark. We have an information deficit. And I feel like we could continue to have these conversations. Could probably have at least 20 more of these conversations, but at least in the 5 that we've had in the 12 hours or so that we spent together has been incredibly valuable to myself, my staff, and the work that we are going to be doing moving forward. So again, just to say that you have that commitment from our office, even though this is the last meeting this group will be together, aside from the email feedback around any potential report back, we look forward to engaging in these similar exercises moving forward. But with that, again, this is our last meeting. Thank you so much to everybody for their time. I know time is valuable, and I wish I had my kids here now too. That's just me. But thank you to everybody again for your time, your feedback, your openness to have this respectful dialogue around a lot of complicated and difficult conversations. So with that, I'll say Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and thank you from myself in the Office of Marijuana Policy.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, everybody.
It's everyone.
Thank
you, everyone. Thank you, Eric.
And we end
Thank
early.
you.
I know, we're ending early.
Crazy.
Oh my God, we ended early.
Whoa.
Thanks for putting your kids on. It makes my day, or your
Yes.
grandkids.
Grand